all the 9 classes that you guys will be attending are going to be recorded, and they'll be up on the Illuminate site a day or so, maybe 2 days after class. So if you do ever have to miss a class, or even if you were in class but something didn't make a lot of sense, you can always go back and listen to the recordings. So now that we've got this class recording started, we've got a number of things that we're going to talk about today. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of go over an overview of the entire course and talk to you guys a little bit about what the new version of the GRE looks like, and also, what sort of materials you're going to be receiving as part of this course, what sort of online resources are available to you, and a couple of ideas about, at least to begin with, how we should be studying, how we should be thinking about the test, all of that. After we do that, we're going to do an introduction to the vocabulary questions on the test, so the text completions and the sentence equivalency. That's roughly half the questions on the GRE. Roughly half the questions are very heavily focused on vocabulary. So we're going to get an introduction to both those types of questions and get an introduction to the strategies that we think are going to be most effective to working through those problems. And then in Class 2 and Class 3, we will focus much more in depth on each of them. So definitely, all the stuff we're doing today, it's to get you guys started, get you guys on the road to mastery, but we will come back to all of these topics over and over again over the 9 weeks. We will also, after that, after we do the vocab questions, take a real short break, then come back, and then Liz is going to work with you guys on 2 different math issues. So first off, we're going to talk about the wording, the confusing nature of GRE math problems, and we're going to try to learn how to decode the language that they use on the GRE. And then Liz is also going to work with you guys about quantitative comparisons, which are kind of the weird question that maybe you haven't seen before. They're not present on the GMAT. They're not present on other standardized tests that test math. So they're a little bit odd in that sense, and it's good for us right from the beginning to start to get pretty comfortable working with them. Yeah, and they are very cool because once you learn how to do them well, you oftentimes don't need to do all that much math in order to solve them, which is great. Okay, so let's dive into the course overview. This is what the GRE looks like starting August 1st. Starting August 1st. And I hope you guys are all well aware, but the GRE is changing. In some ways, major changes. In other ways, not that big a deal. But the GRE is changing August 1st, and the fact that you guys are in this class tells me you guys are all planning on taking the test after that revision. One of the things that's staying the same is there still will be an essay portion near the beginning of the course. Near the beginning of the course. Sorry, I keep saying course. Near the beginning of the test, there will be an essay section. And that essay section is going to have an issue essay and an argument essay. Unlike the current GRE, they're only going to give you 30 minutes for each essay. They used to give you 45 for the issue essay. Not a big deal, not a big deal. And as before, the essays are going to be scored on a 0 to 6 scale. And as before, we don't anticipate that the essays are going to matter very much. Most graduate programs that people are applying to are going to care a lot more about things like your personal statement or your statement of purpose or your research statement, depending on the specific type of program you're applying to. If you're applying to an MBA program with the GRE, they're going to care way more about the 3 or 4 or even 5 essays they're asking you to write than they will about the essays on the GRE. That being said, there's probably some programs out there that will pay a little bit more attention to the essays than others. For instance, maybe someone that's applying to a journalism program or somebody that's applying to a creative writing program, maybe the schools care a little bit more then about the essays. But generally speaking, most people should not worry about them too much. We will talk about them. We will practice them. We'll give you guys an opportunity to practice the essays and send them to Liz and I, and we'll grade them and give you our feedback. But in the grand scheme of things, you really shouldn't be spending a lot of your valuable study time focused on the essays. You really should be focusing more on the verbal and the math, because that's what is much more important. Okay, here is the main difference between the old GRE and the new GRE. The old GRE, you just got one verbal and one math. Now you're going to get two verbals and two math sections, and they're going to appear in some sort of a random order. The practice test that I've taken, the order I got was one verbal, one math, a second verbal, and a second math. But in reality, these could appear in a more random order. You might get both verbals first and then both maths second. Unclear for sure what the order is going to be. You're going to get 30 minutes per section on the verbal to answer 20 questions, and then also 20 questions per math section, but they're a little bit nicer on the time there. They give you 35 minutes per section. The really big change in terms of the new version of the GRE is they've changed the scoring. It used to be a 200 to 800 score for the math and the verbal separately, and now it's still separate math and verbal, but the scoring grid is a 130 is the lowest you can get and a 170 is the highest you can get. So the numbers are changing pretty radically. That really doesn't matter to you guys, honestly, because what really matters is how you do in comparison to everybody else taking the test, so the percentiles. And that'll be the same regardless of if the scaled score is a 200 to 800 or a 130 to 170. Some people are also going to see an unscored additional verbal or quant section, and that could appear within the other four sections, sort of any order. If you do receive one of those, you won't know which of the sections you got was the unscored one, but you'll know you got one because you would have seen 5 sections total instead of 4. This is just a way for them to test out future questions. Some people will also get a research section, and if you get a research section, it will be very, very clearly identified, and they will tell you straight up that it doesn't count towards your score, and it will be something, for instance, like they might ask you demographic information or ask you about your study habits in college or things like that. Most people will see something along those lines, but not everyone will, and it really doesn't matter all that much. Okay, questions at all about the basic structure of the test? All right, moving onward, the math. There are 3 basic kinds of questions that you're going to see. One of them is quantitative comparisons, which Liz is going to talk with you guys a little bit more about later. And in these, they give you 2 columns, or 2 quantities, I should say, and they ask you which one's bigger. So pretty straightforward. One of the main challenges we're going to have when we start out with this is just getting used to how the answer choices work. You can also be given discrete quant problems, which are going to be much more familiar to most people. So these are just like the problem-solving type problems that you might have seen on the GMAT if you've taken that test, or the SAT, or the ACT as well if you might have taken that test. Pretty standard. The big difference with the new GRE is that they're giving you different ways to answer the question. So instead of it just being A, B, C, D, E like it used to be, now some of the questions will give you 6 or even 8 different answers and ask you to pick all that are correct. So you might end up picking just one answer, or you might end up picking 3 or 4 or 5 answers. They also give you problems where they just give you a box and you have to type in your answer. So you're not choosing from amongst different answers, you're simply typing in an answer. So that's a little bit of a difference as well. And then finally, the test still has data interpretation, just like the old version of the GRE did. And this is simply a type of question where they're going to give you a graph or a chart or some other data set like that and ask you to answer questions on the basis of the graph. On the verbal side of things, also 3 basic types of questions, although there's a little more play here. First of these are the text completion. And for those of you guys that have studied for the old version of the GRE at all, this is very, very similar to the sentence completions. Some of them have 1 blank, some of them have 2 blanks, some of them, as we'll see in a little bit, actually have 3 blanks. So that's a big, a little bit of a change from the old sentence completion. What do you guys notice is not on this list? Anybody real familiar with the old GRE? What is no longer on the verbal? Anybody taking the old GRE? What's no? All right, yeah, that's the first one. No analogies. And what else? No. What was the other type that's not on this list anymore? Anybody remember? No analogies anymore, and no also starts with AN. Antonyms, yeah, you guys have it. So no analogies anymore, no antonyms. So for those of you guys that hated the real vocab-heavy questions, this is great because the text completions, while they're still, you know, directly testing your vocabulary, it's much more about context than it is about vocabulary. So that's great. The test also has a new type of question, sentence equivalence. In some ways, this is very similar to the text completion. They're going to give you a sentence. It's only going to have 1 blank, and you've got to figure out what word fits best. The difference here is they're actually going to give you 6 answers to choose from, and they're asking you to pick 2 of them that work the same way. Now, those 2 words don't have to be perfect synonyms, but they've got to be pretty close. And that's kind of interesting. That's sort of the new way that they're testing us on the verbal. And then finally, about half of the verbal questions are going to be reading comprehension. And that's, you know, a big change from the previous version of the GRE, how much of the test is reading comprehension. Within reading comprehension, there's actually a couple of different kinds of questions. Sometimes a question will simply ask you to pick from amongst 5 answers like you're used to, but some questions will actually ask you to select a sentence in the passage. And some questions will actually give you 3 choices and ask you to pick all of the choices that you think are correct. And maybe you pick none of them, maybe you pick 1 or 2 or 3. So a little bit of a change in how the reading comp looks. It's still testing the same basic skills though, and we'll spend a lot of time on that towards the middle and second half of the course. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how the GRE is adaptive. So how many passages in a section? Out of the 10 questions, Mohammed, you're probably going to see somewhere in the order of about 4 different passages. One of the passages will probably be a little bit longer and might have 3 or 4 questions, but then you'll get a couple of passages that are much shorter and might only have a 1 or 2 questions associated with it. But good question, definitely a good question. You guys will get used to that as you're seeing them, for sure. So the old version of the GRE is what was known as an adaptive test. And the old version of the GRE, what that meant is it was adaptive by question. If you got a question wrong, the test adapted and gave you an easier question. If you got a question correct, the test adapted to you and gave you a harder question. The new version of the GRE is also adaptive, sort of, but in a much simpler way. The way the new GRE works in terms of adaptivity is that everybody gets essentially the same first section. And that first section is considered medium level. And I say essentially the first section. In reality, they're going to give different test takers different first sections just so people can't cheat off of each other's computer screens. But basically speaking, everybody's getting a set 20-question first section. So this first section, 20 questions, and it's considered medium level. And that doesn't mean every question is medium level. There'll be some harder questions and there'll be some easier questions, but the overall level of the section is going to be medium. That section is set ahead of time. So once you start that section, right, once you start that section, you're going to get those 20 questions. The 20 questions you're going to get aren't going to change based on whether you get the first couple right or wrong. Once you finish the first section, the test decides, based on how many you got correct, whether the second section it's going to give you should be a hard section, a medium section, or an easy section. So let's say you got most of the questions right in the first section. The second section you see is going to be a pretty hard one. That doesn't mean every question's hard. There'll be some medium questions mixed in there, but generally speaking, that section's going to trend to the hard end of the spectrum. If you did really poorly on the first section, then your second section would be an easy section instead. And then same thing, if you're kind of in the middle on the first section, you'll be kind of in the middle on the second section. One thing I want you guys to notice here is the overlap. And what this overlap here in these circles is talking about is it's talking about your final score, right? So remember, the score is going from a 170 at best to a 130 at worst. So let's say a 170 up here and then a 130 down here. What I mean by the overlap here is that if you do pretty well on the first section and your second section is a medium section, you could get the same final score by getting most of the second section correct. You could get the same final score as someone that did better on the first section, but then worse on the second section, even though they were in the hard section. So someone that did great on the first section and got the hard section but then bombed it, they're going to end up somewhere in the bottom of this circle. Someone that did decent on the first section and then really good on the second section, right? They're going to be in the top of this circle, and there's a lot of overlap here. So what this means is you don't want to think about how you do on the first section as being the be-all, end-all of what your final score is going to be. You still have a lot of power to affect how well you're going to do on the test. That means that don't worry about which second section you get. First off, you're not going to know for sure whether you're in an easy section, a medium section, or a hard section. You're not going to know that for sure anyway. You can try to guess, but chances are good that you won't know for sure. And because you have the opportunity to have a range of scores based on how you do on the second section, here's what you want to do. Don't overthink it. Do as well as you can on the first section, and then whatever happens on the second section, do as well as you possibly can there. And you can still end up with a pretty good score, even if you didn't get the hard section. Questions at all so far? And by the way, I'd love to give you guys more information about exactly what numbers I'm talking about falling into these overlaps, but until the test is actually released on August 1st and until the scores are released in October and November, we won't really know a whole lot about how this translates to an exact numerical score. We've got a range that we know based on the practice tests they've released, but we don't know the exact numbers. In fact, the people that write the test, they don't know the exact numbers. They're going to have to wait and see how everybody does on the test. Questions at all so far? Okay, you guys are a quiet class. No questions so far. So Sarah, yes, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but within each section, you can actually go back and forth because that entire 20 questions is set. You can go back and forth within a section. Now, you can't go back and forth between sections. So for instance, if you're working your second verbal section, you can't go back to the first verbal section, but you can skip around within a section. Most people, to be honest, are going to find that this test is time intensive enough that you're not going to be able to skip around very much. That you may think that you're going to mark a bunch of questions as, oh, I couldn't figure it out the first time, I'll go back and solve it later once I finish the other questions. But to be completely honest with you guys, in 30 minutes on the verbal or 35 in the math, most people are going to find that they're having a hard time finishing, period. Yeah, it's a nice little feature if you've got time, but if you don't have time, then it probably doesn't make that much of a difference. What I would say is for most people, you should give yourself permission to maybe mark and review 1 or 2 questions at most, but the rest of the questions, if you're not understanding it the first time you look at it, you just have to guess and leave it alone. If you didn't get it the first time, chances are not very good that you're going to get it the second time you look at it. The only difference there would be, if you've got a question that you're like 80% sure of, but you just love to be able to do a calculation to double check yourself. Yeah, maybe if you've got time, you go back and you do that computation to double check your answer. But for most people, you're really not going to have enough time to be able to use this very much. And in fact, you're probably going to hurt your score if you spend too much of your time jumping back and forth. The other big change is that there's going to be a basic on-screen calculator for the math portion of the test. And by basic, we mean really basic. So it will allow you to multiply, add, divide, and subtract, and not a whole lot else, to be honest. Not a whole lot else. Most of the problems are written in a way that using the calculator might actually make things harder. And we'll talk a lot about that when we're working on math. We'll talk a lot about when you should be using the calculator and when you definitely shouldn't be using the calculator. Some people are going to use the calculator too much, and it's actually going to hurt them or slow them down. There's a lot of problems on the GRE that are actually a lot simpler to do if you don't bother trying to do the calculation at all. In terms of the actual course, this is, let me go over some of the materials you'll receive if you decide, for the 3 people in here that are in the class, you hopefully have already received your books. And for everybody here that's a trial student, this is a look at some of the books that you'll receive as part of the course. So we have, so Mohammed, the quant is not going to be any more difficult or any easier. And I can say that very, very clearly because, and I know that for a fact, because how you do on the GRE is not based on how you do on the questions. It's based on how you do compared to everybody else that takes the test. The people taking the test are all the same people that took it last year and the year before and the year before that. And it's the same population taking the test. So when they change the test up, that doesn't actually make it harder or easier. It just changes it. And since it changes it for everybody else, just like it changes it for you, all that really matters is you now have to learn how to answer the questions differently a little bit. But generally speaking, it's exactly the same. And in terms of more of the level of math being tested, it's staying exactly the same. It's still testing you on high school geometry, high school algebra, a little bit of basic college level statistics. But remember, every change that they've made to this test is a change for everybody else taking it. And your score is not based on how many questions you got right. Your score is based on how many questions you got right compared to everybody else. So don't think about it as harder or easier. Think about it as just being a little bit different, and we just need to learn how to handle those differences. In terms of our books, yes, Sarathi, absolutely. So the books are all updated for the revised GRE. We just got them, Liz and I just got our hands on our copies a couple of days ago. So they have just come off the presses. They've just been updated for the new version of the test. Some of the math is going to stay pretty similar because the actual foundational knowledge you need to know for the GRE has stayed the same, but yes, they are updated for the revised test. 5 of the books are focused on different aspects of math, so different topics of math. And these are less question-based and more topic-based. So there's an entire book about algebra, an entire book about fractions, decimals, and percents, an entire book about geometry, and so on and so on. We also have a book that is focused more on question types for the math. So a book that specifically looks at strategies for the quant comp and the data interpretation. And then finally, there are 2 books for the verbal, and that sounds like less than for the math, but the verbal books are much, much thicker. And one of the books is devoted mostly to reading comprehension with a little bit of the essay stuff tossed in. And then the other book is focused on the vocabulary questions, the text completions and sentence equivalents. And in addition to that, this 8th book also has a lot of really useful chapters about vocabulary and about the kind of academic idiomatic language that tends to show up on the text completion and sentence equivalence problems. We're also going to give you the GRE official guide to the revised test. This is the most important book you'll have. These are all questions that were written by ETS, the same people that write the real GRE. All of these are questions that they have published as being appropriate for preparing for the GRE. So when you're studying for a standardized test, strategy guides, books written by test prep companies, that's helpful, but in the end you need to practice on the real problems written by the same people that write the real test, and that's what these books are. And then this doesn't really apply down at the bottom because you guys are our first online class. We will be giving you tons of handouts, but because you are our first class, we're going to be emailing you those handouts instead of mailing you a big handout book, simply because those handouts are still being created for the last couple of classes. But you guys will be every week in email getting a ton of different handouts. Those handouts include things like the vocabulary list to learn that week, extra practice on some of the topics that we'll be talking about, things like that. Online resources, we have developed 6 full CAT tests, and we've been working really hard on these tests to get them switched over to the format of the new GRE. And this is a great way for you guys to practice your skills, but also to use them almost as a diagnostic to help you determine what your strengths and weaknesses are, because that will make a big, big difference when you look to see what you need to be focusing your study time on. For everybody that hasn't done it yet, I recommend doing the first practice exam right away, as soon as possible, because you don't really know what you need out of the course until you know what your score is, or what your strengths or weaknesses are, whether you're more math, whether you need more on the math side or more on the verbal side. And in addition to that, it really helps Liz and I, when we take a look at the classes scores, it really helps Liz and I determine how much of our time we should focus on the different topics. Other online resources, we've also got blogs and forums that are definitely worth keeping up with and reading. Lots of great information there. This is really important, foundations of math. Some people are probably coming to us already being pretty comfortable with the math. And if so, that's great. That's great. That means class is really going to be focused on taking that good math knowledge that you already have and showing you how to apply it on GRE problems, how to avoid the trickiness, how to deal with the strange language that they like to use. Other people, though, are probably going to be coming to us a lot weaker on the math side. And by weaker, what I really mean is maybe you've forgotten a lot more about the high school math you used to know. In that case, you might want to go to the foundations of math. That's kind of set up to be done before class to get you back up to speed on the basics, so that when it comes time to do the actual GRE problems in class and on your homework, you've already reminded yourself all of the basics that that maybe you've forgotten in the couple of years since you were in high school or middle school. And then sort of the other end of the extreme is about every week or every other week we post a really, really difficult problem that we've written, kind of a GRE style, very difficult challenge problem, and you get a chance to answer that on the forums, and if you get them right, win prizes. So that's kind of a fun little extra there. Course overview, you guys will all have this in your syllabus, but give you guys an idea of what we're doing today. And if you notice, we're basically doing at least a little bit of math and at least a little bit of verbal every single class. Every single class. We're going to be really heavy with the vocab questions for the first half of the course, and then we're going to be heavy on the reading comp kind of in the middle of the course, and then near the end of the course we'll focus again a little bit more on the vocab. The vocab section of it. And then in addition to that, you guys will notice that we'll also take a couple of take time out in a couple of the later courses to talk about the essays and to talk about things to do to prepare for the test. And on the math side, we're going to be doing things like a basic math refresher next week, fractions, decimals, percents after that, algebra, geometry, the word problems, the number properties, and each of these topics from class 3 onward constitutes its own book. So there's an entire FDP book that you're able to read in order to get ready for class. So those strategy guides, those first 5 books, each chapter is self-contained. So if you're reading a chapter and it's not making sense, come back to it. Go on to something else. There's going to be check your skills questions throughout the chapter. Definitely worth making sure that you've got everything down well before you move on. And then finally, think about the books as being pretty well self-contained. Now, to some extent, they build on each other a little bit. In other words, you've got to know a decent amount of algebra before you're going to be able to do the word translations and the geometry. But that's okay. That's not the books themselves. You can really learn the topics in them out of order if you need to. So what this means is if you start to fall behind or you miss a class or two, you're better off getting ready for the next class than trying to make up the stuff that you've missed up to that point. If you do happen to miss a class, like I said at the beginning, all of these classes are going to be recorded, and about a day or so after the class is over, then you can go back and watch the class by logging back into Illuminate, and there should be a list of the recordings for you to look at. And if you need to access them and you're having a hard time finding them, just let us know and we can point you in the right direction. This is also a great place to go back to even if you were in class. Let's say you were in class and something that I said or maybe something that Liz said didn't make 100% sense. You can go back and rewatch that part of the class and make sure that you understand it perfectly. All right, homework priorities. Here's your priorities. Number 1 is the stuff in the quant strategy guides. We only have a limited amount of time together, right? We've only got about 3 hours times 9. That's 27 hours. That means that our time, especially on the math side of things, we're really going to focus on how to answer GRE level math problems. That means we don't have time in class to spend too much time going over sort of basic math properties, although we will certainly do that when it's appropriate. We want you guys to get back up to a basic math level by working through the strategy guides so that when class rolls around, you're totally prepared to apply that knowledge on GRE level problems. So that means that if you do nothing else, get through the quant strategy guides that are assigned every single week. Get through that first. And there'll be priority codes next to different items, and that'll get a star every time to work through a quant strategy guide. Also very important, of course, are the verbal assignments, but if you need to put off a verbal assignment so that you can get through the math, for most people, that's probably a better choice. Obviously, if you're more weak on verbal and very strong on math, that might get reversed a little bit, but for most people, you can always make up verbal a little bit easier than you can math. And if you do fall behind, don't give up. You know, especially if you start to find yourself falling behind, let Liz and I know and talk to us. Stay around after class or show up a little bit early or email us, and we will do whatever we can to try to help you get caught back up and to try to give you advice about what to focus on. I'll say this, studying for a standardized test, especially at the beginning, can seem very, very overwhelming. We're going to assign you guys a ton of homework, and it's going to seem like more than you can possibly ever do. That is completely understandable, okay? But don't give up. Don't freak out. It is doable, and let us know that we need to step in and give you advice about what to focus on. All right, a couple of keys to our success. Attend class and ask as many questions as you can, right? We get people sometimes that are shy about asking questions. Don't be shy. If you've got a question, chances are somebody else is thinking the same thing and just hasn't worked up the courage to ask it. So anytime, please stop Liz and I and ask your questions, and we will make sure that we cover them all. And I've got a question in the chat about how many hours a day recommended for homework. You know, it's a little bit different for different people, but I would say week by week, in order to keep up with the level of homework that we're going to assign, you're looking at somewhere in the order of about 15 hours to 20 hours of homework each and every week. That's a lot. Not everybody is going to be able to do 15 to 20 hours, but I would say at a minimum you want to be able to do at least 8 to 10 hours of homework a week. Now, how do you divide up that 8 to 10 hours of homework? Don't do 8 hours on Saturday, right? That's terrible. But also, you don't want to do too much on a Monday, a Tuesday, or a Wednesday. You know, you want to spread it out. So you're much better off maybe doing an hour a day after work or an hour and a half a day on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then try to do, you know, an hour and a half in the morning on Saturday and an hour and a half in the evening on Saturday, right? Breaking it up into 2 different study sessions. One of the chances that one of the things that happens to people is they study too much all at once and they get burned out. After about an hour, hour and a half, or an hour and a half, you're going to find that there's going to be diminishing returns from continued studying. So you want to do more sessions, shorter amounts of time. All right, a couple of other questions. So Mohammed's asking about, is vocab essential? It's still pretty important. I would agree that the vocab difficulty is a little bit lower than it used to be, but they kind of have messed with us a little bit. The vocab level is a little bit less, but the difficulty or the complexity of the sentences they use has gone way up. Have gone way up. So the sentences are more confusing and more complicated, but the actual vocabulary is probably more, probably the hardest vocabulary on the new test is a 700 level on the old test. As many as you possibly can learn, Mohammed, absolutely. Most people are probably not going to be able to do more than about 7 words a day, and that's probably a good amount to learn. As part of the course, you'll get a vocab list from us that has 49 words to learn every week for the 9 weeks of the course. And that's probably a good starting place. I mean, that's a good start, Mohammed. That's a great start. That's a great start. I'd stick with our vocab list, but, you know, and I've got another question asking, finding it very difficult to keep up with learning new words every day. Any tips? How many words should I learn each day to learn all the 3,000 words? I don't know where you're getting the number 3,000 from. I think somewhere on the order of about 400 to 500 words is a really good start. 3,000 words is way, way too many. There's no way you're going to remember them all. I'd rather you learn 400 words really, really well than 3,000 words really badly. Okay, so 3,000 words is way, way, way overdoing it. And that Barron's book that has 3,000 words, I know exactly which book you're talking about, Jignasa. Most of the words in that book have never appeared on the GRE before. That book that has 3,000 words in it is I think a pretty mediocre book, because a lot of those words, I've been taking the GRE for 11 years now, and a lot of those words I've never seen on the test. So as part of the course, we will be giving you guys a vocab list that's got 49 words to learn every week. That's 7 words per day. If you guys can get through that list and learn them really, really well, then that's going to help a lot. But let me hold off on answering any other vocab questions for now, because we're going to start talking about vocabulary really in about 2 minutes, and I'll show you guys some slides that talk a lot more about learning vocabulary. Couple of big don'ts. I think the number 2 and number 3 are the most important. People get so worried about getting every question right that they fail to get any questions right. Right? You're so worried about doing everything perfect. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to miss questions. That's just part of life. That's normal. In fact, you can get a very, very high score. If you get 14 or 15 out of the 20 questions right on the first section, you're going to get the hard section for your second section. And if you get 14 or 15 of those right, you're going to get, if not a perfect score, then very close to a perfect score. So that means you get 30 questions right out of 40, 3/4, 75%. 75% in college is a C. But on this test, 75% on it probably gets you, if not a perfect score, very close to it. So there's a lot of room. There's a lot of room there for you to miss questions. There's a lot of room for you to make mistakes, make errors. That's okay. You don't need to be perfect, but you need to be moving along at a good speed, and you need to be getting most of the questions that you're capable of getting right. So don't get hung up on being perfect all the time. That's going to hurt you more than it's going to help you. And the same thing, by the same token, don't get discouraged either. If things seem tough in the first couple of weeks, that's totally normal. It will get better. You will be able to learn this stuff. You will be able to make significant progress on this test, as long as you don't get too discouraged and give up. As long as you keep slogging through and keep doing the homework, you're going to be able to make significant improvements on the test. All right, any questions about the course overall? About to switch over and talk about vocab here, but let me stop now and ask if there's any questions. All right, let's dive into some vocab. So as we said a couple of times, 2 of the 3 verbal questions are testing us out on our vocabulary. And when we say vocabulary, this is the kind of vocabulary that maybe you don't actually hear used in everyday speech very often. Maybe you see it used more in academic writing. Words that maybe you've run into in a newspaper or a magazine or a paper or an article or something. But even though you've seen it before, maybe you're not 100% certain what it means, what the dictionary definition is. Lots of words based on Latin or Greek roots, but also lots of words that are short and have multiple meanings. Sometimes those are even more difficult than the Latin or Greek root words. And then we also get, and this is a little bit different from the old version of the test, because the vocabulary on the new version of the test is much more sentence-focused, much more context-focused, a lot of the challenge are going to be words that maybe you don't even think about as being vocab words in the first place. And I'll show you guys what I mean by that in just a second. But in terms of sort of the classic idea about GRE vocabulary, these are the kind of words that the test is going to test you on. And by the way, if you don't know these words, that's okay. way. These are not meant to be easy words. This is a page full of words that are probably in the high 150 to 160 range of the test. In other words, these are very high-level words that you're probably not going to run into on the medium section or the easy section, right? But this is the kind of level of words that you might run into as you're getting into the harder sections of the test. Bootless Donald Duck. Yes, I would agree that Donald Duck is bootless, but I'm not going to give you guys, everybody else, the definition of Donald Duck yet, because we're going to see that bootless word again in just a second. I have no idea who Samurai Jack is, so I'm not 100% sure if Samurai Jack is baleful or not. But I'll believe you. I'll believe you. So take a look at this sentence. This, I think, is really where people start running into problems if all they do is memorize vocabulary. So I'll give you guys about 30 seconds, and just be completely honest with me. Give me a check mark if you understand that question really well, and give me an X if you don't understand the sentence for any reason once you're done reading it. Are you sure, Muhammad? Read it again. Okay, so far only 2 people have responded. This is going to be a really slow class if nobody's participating. So once again, read that sentence and mark it an X, pull in with an X, the X from the checker over here by the blue door, if you don't understand this sentence, and use a check mark if you do understand the sentence. Okay, now I'm getting a response. Now I'm getting a response. And don't be embarrassed. Like, don't feel like if you don't understand it, you should leave it blank because you're embarrassed. This is supposed to be hard. This is the level that's getting tested on the GRE now. There are some vocabulary words in this sentence. There are some tough vocabulary words in this sentence. But I think just as difficult as the vocabulary level is the structure, the style, the way they use idiomatic language in the sentence. So let's really take this apart. Let's really take this apart and look at it, right? We have a couple of words here that I think are really important. What does heretofore mean? What does heretofore mean? That's not really a vocabulary word that people would learn in a Barron's list of vocab words, right? Heretofore, that's not a vocabulary word. Yeah, Jane's got it, but at the same token, it might not be what we normally consider vocabulary, but it's really important to understand this sentence. Okay, so I agree, Jane. Until now, I'm going to put that text in red and make it a little bit bigger so you guys can read it. Okay, what does unlauded mean? That is kind of a classic level vocabulary word. What does unlauded mean? Yeah, not applauded. I'd agree. I'm going to go with not praised. Not praised, but same idea as what you guys are saying. Okay, while one would think that the until now not praised researcher's breakthrough would redound. Okay, what does redound mean? Anybody know that? Redound. What do you mean by finish? Like end her career? Yeah, redound means to have an effect on. Yeah, and it's actually, Jignasa, the opposite. It's not redound, they're not using here to push it back. They mean to help it. In this way, they mean help her future. And the reason why is that they're using it as a breakthrough. The breakthrough, you think that the breakthrough would help her career. but it turns out that it's not going to. Now, the real definition, I think the easiest way to put it would be contribute to. Contribute to her future, okay? In this case, in a positive sense. But on the other hand, the response was glacial. Does glacial mean cold? What do you guys think? What does glacial mean in this use? Yeah, it's definitely a negative. It might be icy. It could mean cold, but it also might mean slow. It also might mean slow. And in both cases, what they mean here is that she didn't get a very good response. She didn't get a very good response from the rest of the people in her field. That's unfortunate. Except, right, save here. Save has a second meaning, which means except for the qualified approbation. What does approbation mean? More than support. Support's a good start, but it's even stronger than support. Not blame, not backing. It's actually just praise or commendation. Praise or commendation is what approbation means. And there are a couple of words that sound similar, Bharati, that do mean to blame, but approbation itself means to praise or to commend. And then I think this might be the most important word here. What does qualified in this case mean? When we say someone qualified, we mean they did well enough to get what they wanted. You qualified for a home mortgage. But that's not what that word means here. What does qualified mean here? Deserved, reserved, no, not quite. Or what do you mean by, let me take that back. What do you mean by reserved, Sarati? What do you mean by reserved? Not really meaningful or influential. Yeah, restricted in some way. Yeah, Sarathi, I agree with you. The word I'm going to put up here is limited in some way. All right, so let me give you guys an idea of, if I say Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player ever, I am giving him my unqualified praise or approval. Okay, but let me give you qualified approval. LeBron James is very, very good, but he's never won an NBA Finals. So that's qualified praise. Instead of in an unlimited way saying someone is great, a qualified phrase would be to say, oh, they're pretty good, but here's the problem. I'm restricting it. I'm limiting it in some way. Does that make sense to everybody? So what this sentence is really saying is she had a major breakthrough, right, in science. She should have gotten a lot of praise, but she didn't. One person sort of praised her. That's what this sentence is saying. Does that make sense to everybody? And I'm actually leaving something out. She hasn't had much success in the past is the first part of the sentence. Here's a scientist that hasn't had much success in the past, but now she had a major breakthrough. She should have gotten a lot of praise. That's what we'd expect. But she didn't. She didn't get a lot of praise. But one person sort of gave her praise, right? That's what this complicated, challenging sentence means. Yes, and my qualified NBA critic, the reason why I am qualified in the other meaning is I watch a lot of the NBA. but I'm even more qualified to be a soccer critic because I watch even more soccer than basketball these days. But that's the other meaning of the word qualified. That's the other meaning of the word qualified. All right, so how do we learn to take a sentence like this and break it down? Well, we're going to practice that a lot in class. But in addition to that, learning new vocabulary, learning idiomatic and metaphorical language. In addition to that, the best way to learn this kind of stuff is to read hard stuff. So read The Economist, read the Smithsonian, read academic papers, read the Atlantic Monthly or Harper's or the New Yorker, read the New York Times. Just read stuff that's very, very well written. Read stuff that's very well written, and you'll start to understand this. And by the way, if you think this sentence that we've got here is pretty crazy, it is. But as Liz can agree with me here, this is what a lot of writing in academia looks like. In fact, this is actually pretty nice for academia. This is pretty kind for academia. I'm not sure why people in academia can't write in simpler ways, but this is how they write. So learning to do this now will help you out on the GRE, but it will really help you out for grad school. Now, I know it's different in different fields. In my field, I'm in a social science field, and this is all we deal with is crazy stuff like this. Other things maybe not as much, but still, it's going to be something that you're going to have to deal with when you're in grad school. All right, not to scare you, but moving on, we also have issues with roots, right? And roots can be both helpful and problematic. So let me give you an example of that. Here's the Latin word sanguis, which has to do with blood. And the English word that we get from there is sanguinary. Sanguinary means bloody or bloodthirsty. Okay, you can remember that. Sanguis means blood. The English word sanguinary means bloodthirsty. But there's another English word here as well that comes from medieval medicine, sanguine. And that means something almost the exact opposite of bloodthirsty. It means cheery. It means happy. It means pleased, optimistic, sunny. And it also comes from that same root coming from blood. And the idea was if you were really red-cheeked, ruddy, that meant you were cheerful. Think about Santa Claus and his red cheeks, right? That's where we get this word sanguine. So the point I want to make is knowing the root sanguis helps you out a little bit, but until you've also learned that one way to use blood is in an English word that's a very strongly negative word, and another way to use it is in an English word that's a very positive word. Until you recognize that, you're going to struggle with those words on the test. Here's an even more extreme example. So we've got merere, which is Latin for to earn. And Latin takes that, and the noun form of merere in Latin is meritum, which is a thing that is earned. That leads to the English word merit and the English word meritorious, worthy of praise. But the word merere also leads to meretrix, which is a prostitute. So meretrix is a prostitute. You can sort of think about that as being to earn is the merere, and trix is a woman. Trix is an ending that often is used when talking about a woman. So what is a prostitute? A woman who earns money. Okay, think about this. I'm trying not to be too un-PC here, but this is how the Romans thought about it, so don't blame me for this. From the word meretrix in English, we get the word meretricious. One meaning of the word meretricious is related to prostitution, but actually, these days in English, we usually mean meretricious to describe something that is cheaply or falsely attractive. So if I saw a friend of mine wearing costume jewelry, I might describe that as being meretricious, right? It's not really valuable, but it looks like it's kind of attractive, but in a very cheap way. So the point of all this is that I think roots are a great way to learn vocabulary, but roots are not all that great when you're in the middle of the test and you're trying to figure out what a word means. Partly that's for the reasons I just showed you. But another reason is that English has borrowed words from many different languages. So you might run into a word that you think has a root that looks Latin, and then it turns out that it doesn't have a Latin root at all. That word's coming from Hindi, or that word's coming from Navajo, or that word's coming from Portuguese instead. English has borrowed a lot of words from a lot of different languages around the world, and that's another reason why roots can get us in trouble, because we see a word that looks like it should do something, but it actually doesn't because it's coming from a totally different language. How you should use roots is to help you group words together and learn them in groups. Learn when you go to learn the word sanguinary, also learn the word sanguine, because they're related. They mean very different things, but they're related. And if you can learn words like that by making connections between different words, it's going to be much easier to remember them. So how do we start learning vocabulary? Well, the first thing is you got to do it every day. You can't get away with cramming. If all you do is memorize vocab words, you're not going to do well on the GRE, because they're not testing you on how well you memorize. They're testing you on how well you understand how to use those words in sentences, in context. And even if you did have a perfect photographic memory, that would just be a start. Then you would know what the word means. That doesn't mean you know how to use it in a sentence or how it's going to appear in a sentence on the GRE. You got to go beyond just memorization. And that means that you can't cram this stuff. You got to do it every day. So don't just look at the definitions. Do something with it. Look it up on Google and see how it's been used by good writers in the past. Write a sentence yourself. Maybe update your Facebook with a vocab word, right? My new GRE class is replete with bonhomie. Does anybody know what that sentence means? My new GRE class is replete with bonhomie. If I want to translate that, my new GRE class is replete with bonhomie. Yeah, replete means full of, and bonhomie means friendliness or fun or goodwill, good people. Yeah, exactly. So hopefully that's true. Hopefully that is true. So the other point to make is the more you learn, the more you can learn. Once you get the first couple of words down, the next couple are even easier. Once you learn sanguine, it's easier to learn sanguinary, right? Once you learn merited, it's easier to learn meretricious, right? That's just, a fact of how our brains work, or meritorious, I should say. It's easier to learn meretricious. Once you learn saturnine, it's easier to learn jovial and martial. It's easier to learn Plutonian, right? Because all of these words are related to Greek or Roman gods, mercurial. Right? It's easier to learn those words if you can make connections between them and figure out good ways to use them. So here would be a vocab flashcard. So here's the front, calumny. Calumny, a noun. Okay? Notice that we don't just put the word, we put the pronunciation, and we put, what part of speech it is. And then here's the back, right? Notice what's on the back. It's not just the definition of the word, but we've also written in some synonyms of it, right, to help us remember it even easier. We've also looked at maybe coming up with a sentence in, using that word, or using that word as a different part of speech, right? All of this is going to help us learn the word better. I'm not a big fan of memorization. If all you do is memorize, you're not making much progress. What I want you guys to do is learn the words as part of your own usable language, not just as things you've memorized. So we also need to focus on idioms. Remember, we saw on the previous page, we saw words like qualified. We saw words like save. We saw words like heretofore, right? These aren't really vocabulary in the same way. They're idioms. They're specific ways of saying things that we need to learn. So here's a particular idiom that sometimes shows up. Not only X, but also Y. Why is this important? Because if I see a sentence completion that says, right, he is not only smart, but also what's going to come in the blank? What kind of word is going to come in the blank based on this particular idiom? Anybody, any thoughts? Yeah, noun phrase, okay. Be more particular. Is it going to be a positive word or a negative word? The not, but, sometimes people think it's going to be the opposite of smart. Is it? No, it's going to be positive, and it's going to be even stronger. Smart is kind of weak. It's going to be even stronger. Not one thing but another means they're opposite. Not only one thing but also another means something even stronger. So here's an example. The financial crisis prompted not only job loss, that's the thing, but also foreclosures and bankruptcies. That's the thing that's even more. So maybe we might say he's not only smart, but also really, really kind, right? Something also that's even stronger. So learning those idioms is really important because it doesn't matter if you know every vocabulary word they're going to test you on. If you don't understand what the sentences mean, you aren't able to put the correct words in. All right, how to learn vocabulary. So here's that word calumny again. Attack it in every way possible, and that means hearing the word. That means seeing the word in writing. That means speaking it out loud or using it in a fun sentence that you come up with, right? All of these are very important. We're not going to learn that word until we get a chance to utilize it in a number of different ways, right? Couple of practical methods. Don't be shy about these words. Don't just trust that you understand it in context. Actually jump right in and look it up, right? Look it up immediately, whether that's on your phone or maybe if you don't have a phone that you can look stuff up on, keep a little notepad with you and jot down words you run into. Make rich flashcards. That means don't just put the word on the front and the definition on the back. Put other stuff. Put synonyms. Put related words. I don't have that on this one, but I do have a list of synonyms: slander, vilify, defame, traduce, right? Words that are related to it, sentences that you've used the word in to understand the context. Maybe if you run into that word in a GRE problem, mark down what problem you saw it in so you can look at that problem again. Two things at the end that kind of contradict each other. Number one, focus on the GRE likely words. That's why I don't love that one Barron's book that has 3,000 words, because of those 3,000 words, there's only about 1,000 that have ever shown up in my in my knowledge on the GRE. Now, of course, I don't take the test every month, so I don't know every problem that's ever shown up on the GRE, but I've taken the test for real, 4 or 5 times, and I've taken practice tests and done every practice problem. So I've seen, a lot of the vocabulary they use, and they use the same words over and over and over again. There's probably about 1,000 to 1,500 words that they use very commonly, but that's more vocab probably than you're going to be able to learn in, 3 or 4 months. So, and you don't need to, because of those, 1,000 or 1,500 words that they seem to use a lot, you probably already know half of those because they're on the easier side. So really, if you can take a group of 400 or 500 words, like the words in our vocab list, and really learn those, that list are words that we've seen crop up on the test repeatedly. If you can really learn those words, you're going to see a tremendous improvement. That being said, you could run into just about any word on the day of the test. You could run into just about any word on the day of the test. And a lot of the times what's important is not so much that you know every single word that's ever appeared in the English language. It's more about your ability to make good guesses about what a word probably means in a way that's really going to help you. In a way that's going to help you get problems correct, even if you didn't know every word. And to give you an example of how you can't know every word ever, let me give you one of the words I got the last time I took the GRE. I got the word callipygus. I hope I'm spelling that right. but I got the word callipygus. It was an antonym, and the correct answer was poorly formed. And I got it right. Kind of lucky because the girl I was dating at the time had mentioned that word to me just like a week before the test. Does anybody know what callipygus means? It is an art history term used to describe ancient statues mostly, and it means having nicely formed buttocks. I am not kidding. Yeah, and Muhammad just answered, right? Pertaining to or having finely developed buttocks. All right? That's what it means, and it's mostly used when people are describing like a Greek or a Roman statue. And I got that word on the GRE, and not the buttocks part, but the answer they used was poorly formed, being the opposite of well-formed or nicely formed, right? And what do you do when you run into a word like that? You just do your best at making a guess and moving on. You can't know every word in the English language, and the test doesn't expect you to know it. All right, so one final thing is look those words up. And there's a couple of really cool places to go online these days. Dictionary.com, of course. Merriam-Webster is M-W. TheFreeDictionary.com. I really love this. I just started looking at this site, but LearnersDictionary.com is designed for people that are learning English as a second language. It's designed to help them learn vocabulary. But what it really does a great job of, it does a great job of showing how words get utilized in sentences in a way that's really useful, even for people that are native English speakers. Now, the problem with that one is LearnersDictionary.com doesn't have every word in the English language. It's only got, 10,000 or so words in there, but it's a really great place to look stuff up if it's there. There's also, Jignasa, there's, Liz, remind me about the rice one that we like a lot. There's a vocab site that's a game. Yeah, freerice.com. And it's like a vocab game, and every time you get a question right, they donate rice to starving people. So that's pretty cool because if while you're learning vocab or practicing vocab, you're also helping other people out. So definitely worth checking that out. And there's a bunch out there. I'm kind of old school. Liz might have some better ideas for you guys. Liz is a big fan of flashmybrain.com, whereas I'm more of an old school make my own flashcards, but flashmybrain.com is actually really cool. I must admit, even if I am kind of old school. All right, we are about to dive into working some specific text completion problems together. But before we do that, we've already been going for about an hour and a half. I want to give you guys a very short break. Then we'll come back and do about 20 more minutes of vocab stuff, and then I'll turn it over to Liz, and Liz will take it away and do some math. And before we do that, I want to just get a check or next. We got started a little bit slow today because of the technological issues. We got started about 15 minutes slow. Give me a check if you were okay with us running about 15 minutes late today to make up for the time we lost at the beginning of class, and give me an X if you cannot stick around past 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Okay, I'm getting checks from almost everybody, so we will probably run about 15 minutes late today. And once again, I really apologize for the technological issues we ran into at the start. But let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. I'm going to step away from the computer myself, and then when we come back, we'll dive in and do some vocab questions. Okay, guys, hope everybody is back from their break. Give me a smiley face if you're back in front of your computer. Okay, good. Looks like we've got almost everybody back. Now I'm seeing, yeah. All right, let's move on. So we're going to take maybe about 15 more minutes and give you guys a sort of an introduction to the different vocabulary question types that show up on the test. So the text completions and the sentence equivalencies. And we will, I promise you, spend way more time on this in Class 2 and Class 3. At this point, I just want to give you guys an introduction. So the way text completions work is they give you a sentence, and then they put a blank or two blanks or even three blanks in that sentence, and you have to choose the word or phrase that fits the meaning of the sentence as a whole. And that's our task. And a couple of things that go along with that is there are always going to be, for the one blank ones, 5 choices. If it's a one blank text completion, you'll get 5 choices. And it is usually just a word per blank, but occasionally you'll run into a problem where instead of one word per blank, it'll actually be a very short phrase or an article in a word or something like that. And one really important thing is all the choices are the same part of speech. So if you discover that this first word here is a verb, that means all 5 of them are going to be verbs as well. If the first word's a noun, all 5 of them are going to be nouns. This is really helpful because some words can have a meaning as a verb, but they might also have a different meaning as a noun or as an adjective. And knowing that they all have to be the same part of speech can help narrow down which meaning of the word they are using for that answer choice. So we also get problems that have 2 or 3 blanks instead of one blank. And in this case, you're going to get 3 choices per blank. And they are independent. So if you guys remember, back on the old test, you'd have answer choice A, and you'd have word 1, and you'd have word 2, and you were going to pick answer choice A, which meant you were picking both words in answer choice A. Now the 2 blanks are totally independent. You could pick the first word in the 3 answers for the first blank, but then pick the second word for the second blank. That means that if you're randomly guessing, now all of a sudden you have a 1 out of 9 chance of getting it right instead of a 1 out of 5 chance. And Muhammad's totally right. It is a little bit tricky because it's win or lose. There's no partial credit given. In other words, if you got the first word correct but missed the second word, you missed the entire problem. There is no partial credit given. Once again, the same part of speech for each blank. That doesn't mean both blanks are the same part of speech. You could certainly have the first word be all nouns in the answers and the second word be all adjectives in the answers. That is totally possible. But within each blank, it's going to be the same part of speech. So let's talk about a basic approach for dealing with this. And here's one that's going to have 2 blanks in it. And if there's going to be 2 blanks in it, what I'm going to write down on my paper is I'm going to draw a line kind of like this and like this, kind of a grid, so I can keep track of what's going on with each answer choice. But my first step is simply to read the question. And what do you guys notice I'm not showing you on this problem? What do you not see on this problem? Yep, I'm not showing you the answer choices because I don't want you to look at them. The first thing I want you guys to do is read the sentence and ignore the answers. The answers are going to be there to trick you, right? You're going to see in a little bit 6 different words, 3 for each blank. 4 of those words are there to trick you. Let's not even look at them. Let's deal with the sentence on its own first. So the director's commercially motivated attempts to blank the imperatives of the mass marketplace were blank, as evidenced by the critical acclaim but low attendance garnered by his film. So we want to read the sentence and we want to try to understand the entire sentence, what its overall meaning is. But more specifically, we also want to try to identify clues in the sentence. clues in the sentence that are going to help us understand what words probably need to go in the blank. So what clues do you guys see in this sentence that might help you understand what sort of words the blanks are? Any ideas? What clues do you guys see? Okay, the information after the comma, I agree. That comma is probably pretty important, right? As evidenced by. So as evidenced by tells me that what comes after the comma is going to indicate what happened. It's evidence, it's proof, it's an example that shows what meaning I should attribute to the blanks. So what ended up happening to this guy, and sometimes we need to reorder the sentence, this guy got critical acclaim. So in other words, this guy, the critics loved his movie, but the people didn't. He didn't get a lot of people attending his movie. Okay, what else? What else in here is a clue? Yeah, that word but, kind of like the comma, it helps us understand what direction we're going. Good. What else? What else is in here? We're talking in the second part about critical acclaim but low attendance. What else in the first part might be related to, okay, commercially motivated attempts? I'd agree. And we also get mass marketplace because we talk about attendance and critical acclaim. So those are our clues: commercially motivated, imperatives of the marketplace, low attendance, right? Now we want to write down our own filler words to put in the blanks. This is hard, but if we can do this well, the problems become much, 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 much simpler. Much, much simpler. So what do you guys think? What kind of words should we use for the first blank or the second blank? I'll take either. Sometimes we want to start with the first blank. Sometimes, on the other hand, we want to start with the second blank. Okay, so in infinitive, we probably need a verb here. I'd agree with that. What kind of verb? What's the director doing to the mass marketplace? Okay, I like it. Exploit or manipulate. So we'll put that for the first one. Exploit or manipulate or appease. I like that as well. So that's our first blank. How about our second blank? What does our second blank mean? So the director was attempting to do something with the mass marketplace. What happened? What happened? Was that attempt? Was that attempt? Failure, unsuccessful, right? Were unsuccessful. I like unsuccessful because it matches the context. It works. Unsuccessful, and my apologies for my bad spelling. I think I misspelled that. Or ineffective. That's good too. Ineffective. And I like those that you guys came up with because those work in the sentence, in the context of the sentence, in the idiom of the sentence. Okay, good job. Very good job. So now we're going to look at the answers. And here's what we're going to do when we look at the answers. We're going to look at the answers and compare them, not to the sentence, but we're going to compare them to our words, right? The words that we came up with. We're going to compare them to our words. That way we can't be tricked. Okay, now we need to be careful because I think we came up with really good words. But the problem is that there's a lot of different things that this could work. So we want to keep any answer that even sort of works. So what do you guys think? Sequester. Should I keep it or should I eliminate it? What does sequester mean? What does sequester mean? Anybody know? Start typing if you know this one. All right, nobody's typing. I'm going to put a question mark here for sequester. Okay, how about obey? Does obey work? Does that mean something similar to exploiting or appeasing? What do you guys think? No, okay. How about secure? Is the director trying to secure the imperatives in the mass marketplace? What do you guys think? Yes or no? Okay, I'm going to give this a sort of match. I'm going to give this a sort of match, and we'll come back to it. Okay, taking a look at the second word, we said unsuccessful or ineffective. Does mercenary mean unsuccessful or ineffective? Yeah, mercenary is someone who fights for money. This is the trap answer, right? Because we're talking about commercially motivated. We might describe the director as being mercenary, but his attempts weren't mercenary. His attempts were unsuccessful. So mercenary has to be an X. That's the real trap on this one. How about innumerable? Innumerable, what does that mean? Many, right? Innumerable. Let's be careful. Innumerable doesn't mean no results. Innumerable means unable to be counted. Does unable to be counted work here? Yeah, it does not work. Okay, how about bootless? Does bootless mean unsuccessful or ineffective? Bharati says no. What does bootless mean, Bharati? I'm not getting a whole lot. Let's put a question mark here. Okay, let's go back. Here's where we would be. We would have eliminated mercenary and innumerable. We don't know what bootless means. That means we have to pick it. We have to pick it if we don't know what it means and we know that the other answers are wrong. Now, we didn't like secure very much, so Debbie and Muhammad are both saying sequester has to be correct. If we don't like secure very much and we know obey is wrong, then sequester has to be the right answer. And this is what we're doing. This is our last step. We're going to have to choose the best match. So people are saying we're choosing bootless and sequester. Bootless and sequester. Okay, what do you guys think? Give me a smiley face if you like that pair. All right, bootless, let me give you guys the definition of bootless. Bootless means, anybody know? Anybody look it up in the background while we were working this? It doesn't exactly mean clueless, Bharati. It doesn't exactly mean clueless. And it also doesn't mean lacking boots, right? It means futile. It means worthless. Futile, worthless. And it actually works really well here. So unsuccessful and futile are really good. Yeah, ineffectual. Ineffectual, Natalie. Yeah, that's what dictionary.com says. Yeah, same as futile. Ineffectual. It doesn't work. And so that's a great answer. But we've got a problem. It turns out sequester is not the correct answer. Sequester, what does sequester mean? What does sequester mean? Anybody look it up? Yeah, sequester means to remove or to place in a separate group, right? To remove from a group. To sequester means to place it in isolation or apart from everything else. That's one main meaning of the word sequester. There's a couple of secondary meanings for sequester as well, but that's the main way that it's used, to set it apart, to segregate it, is what sequester means. And so it turns out sequester doesn't actually work here. Sequester doesn't actually work here. And that's okay. We missed this one because we didn't know what the word meant. It turns out that the correct answer is actually obey. The correct answer is actually obey. And what got us in trouble is that when we came up with exploit and appease, which I thought were great words, we were too quick to eliminate obey. When you come up with your own filler words, you want to keep any answer choice that comes even close to those words. And so obey does sort of mean the same thing as exploit or appease. It means going along with it, just like exploiting and appease are in the same direction. It's not a wonderful answer. It's not exactly the same as exploit or appease, but it still is in the same ballpark. And so we don't want to eliminate answers too quickly. If they're even a little bit close, hold on to them at first. Secure ends up being probably the second best answer, but you don't secure the imperatives of the mass marketplace. You secure the mass marketplace. And so idiomatically, secure is incorrect. And the correct answer on this one would have been obey and then bootless. Any questions so far? Does the basic approach make sense? All right, let's try another one very quickly. I'm going to give you guys 1 minute to do this one on your own. Good luck. And by the way, I've changed the polling to A, B, C, D, E, so when you have an answer, do not type it in the chat window. Instead, poll in with your answer. Okay, I've only got answers from about half of everybody. So keep coming in with your answers. I want answers pulled in from Mohammed, Natalie, Sadaf, Catherine, Emma. Give me the answer you're picking on this one. If you have to guess, you have to guess. That's fine. Part of the challenge of this test is learning how to become a good guesser. Okay, still missing answers from 3 people. Jignasa, why did you change your answer? You had it correct the first time. Okay, there it is again. There it is again. Okay, let's talk about this one. So briefings from the blank senator. So let's do a little bit of sentence analysis. The blank is describing what? What does the blank describe in this sentence? Okay, the blank describes the senator. The blank describes the senator, right? And apologies, I turned off everybody's ability to talk, so go ahead and switch back to send to this room. I set it so you guys could only send messages to the moderator for a second, but set it to send to this room. But everybody's saying the same thing. This word is describing the senator. What else describes the senator? What is the senator doing? The rest of the sentence tells us about the senator. So the senator's giving a speech of some sort. Yeah, not really a speech, but a briefing. Does anybody know what a briefing is? Yeah, Caitlin, giving out information. A briefing is just a short little speech that you would give to a group of people to tell them some information that's going on. Okay, what about those briefings? What word is used to describe the briefings? They're protracted. What does protracted mean? Yeah, extended or elongated. So the senator gave long briefings. Longer briefings then was merited by the piddling. What does piddling mean? Okay, then the piddling, the small amount of information. So in other words, the senator is giving long talks that are longer than the small amount of information they deserve. Okay, so if someone talks for longer than they should, I might come up with the word talkative. Does that make sense to everybody? As my filler for this blank, I might come up with the word talkative, right? Other words that mean talkative. Anybody have a good one? Give me another meaning, another word for talkative. Loquacious, that's a great one. What else? Two people gave us loquacious. That's, like I said, great word. Wordy, I love it. What else? This is just for practice. On the day of the test, I'd only come up with one. Verbal diarrhea, I like it, Bharati. I like it. And the other one I was looking for is the word verbose. All of these mean talkative, or talking a lot, or talking too much. And now I'm going to go through that list. What does taciturn mean? Good one. Yeah, long-winded, also very good. What does taciturn mean? Yeah, kind of, but with people it means reserved or quiet. That's the opposite, right? How about charismatic? Does charismatic mean talkative or wordy? Charismatic means charming, makes people like them a lot. Yeah. A lot of people pick this answer. This is one that the first time through I might say it's sort of. What does garrulous mean? Garrulous means talkative. Okay, so is that a keeper? All right, what does inchoate mean? Don't look it up. Give me a question mark if you don't know what it means. Does anybody know inchoate ahead of time? Okay, inchoate, we'll put a question mark. And then gregarious, what does gregarious mean? That's okay, Natalie. None of us are going to know all these words, myself included. Yeah, gregarious means sociable, friendly, jolly. Yeah, does that mean the same thing as talks a lot? So that one's out. Okay, I'm going to go back and say charismatic is not correct. Charismatic is not correct. Even though I kept it originally to be careful, it doesn't really have to do with talking. It has to do with people liking you, right? And oftentimes charismatic people do talk a lot, but not really. So now I've got a choice. I need to choose from between garrulous and inchoate. If I'm down to two and one of them I don't know the meaning of, here's what I do. If the one I know the meaning of is a good answer, that's what I'm picking. But if the one I know is only sort of good, I may have to guess the word I don't know. How good is garrulous, do you guys think? How good is garrulous as an answer? It's great, and so we're going to pick that answer, and that was the correct answer in the end. All right, now let's talk about inchoate. Inchoate, another synonym for it is incipient. But if you don't know what inchoate means, you might not know what, whoops, I'm spelling it wrong, incipient. What does inchoate or incipient mean? Anybody know? It means not yet fully formed, or, oh, that's a great way to put it. In an initial stage, so just getting born, just getting started, undeveloped, not developed yet. Yeah, that's what inchoate means, and that really doesn't have anything to do with talking. All right, well done on that. That one tricked a lot of people, but I think it was more the vocab than the process. All right, let's switch over and talk a little bit about sentence equivalence here, and then we'll move on to math. So sentence equivalence is in some ways very similar to the text completion problems, right? In some ways it's very similar because they're giving us a sentence, and we have to understand the sentence and use that to help us figure out what choices to choose. But there's one really big difference. There's one really big difference, and that is we're going to have to choose two answers. And the two answers we choose must both work in the sentence in the same way. That doesn't mean they have to be exact synonyms, but it does mean they have to be pretty close together. They have to be pretty close together. And the other thing that's important is they're all the same part of speech. So if answer choice A is a noun, then B, C, D, E, and F are going to be nouns as well. All right, so let's talk about the basic approach for this. Really, really similar to what we're doing for text completions. First thing is to read only the sentence and to make sure we understand the sentence. So the Pacific garbage patch, a massive plastic and other debris floating in the Pacific Ocean and estimated to be twice the size of Texas, has blank some of the worst predictions made by environmentalists of the previous generation. And we want to do the same thing we're doing with the text completions in that we want to try to find clues. So what's going on with this garbage patch? What do we know about this garbage patch? Any ideas? Yeah, it's huge. It's a massive plastic and other debris. So it's like all this garbage, and it's twice the size of Texas. And I live in Texas. It's a big old state. That's big, okay? And then the second part of the sentence tells us a little bit more about the blank, right? A little bit more about the blank. We've got predictions made by environmentalists. So once we find and identify these clues, right, then we want to come up with our own filler to put in the blank. So what do you guys think here? What would be a good filler word to put here? Notice we haven't looked at the answers yet. Surpassed. I like it. Surpassed. Right? The environmentalists made really, really, really bad predictions, right? Some of the worst predictions, right? And what we're saying is that this is even worse. This is even worse than what the environmentalists predicted, right? Yeah, and then other people are saying maybe it's not going beyond the predictions, but maybe it's making the predictions true or showing that the predictions are true. I don't know, what's a good vocab word for that? Showing that the predictions are true. Okay, I like that. Confirm. Let's write that down. So I'll write down confirmed. Confirm some of the worst. Okay, now once we've come up with our own filler word, we're going to take a look at the answer choices and we're going to mark down just like we did before in our paper. So we've got augured. Does augured mean confirm or surpass? All right, Catherine's giving me a question mark. Let's go with question mark. All right, corroborated. Does corroborated mean confirmed or surpassed? Debbie's saying yes. Jane's saying yes. Corroborated. What does corroborated mean? Give me a definition of corroborated. We've got a bunch of yeses, so I'll put a check. Start typing in a definition for corroborated. Yeah, it basically means to confirm, to support, right? To give evidence for, right? So for instance, if I say the police think that this man killed his brother, and that was corroborated by an eyewitness, right? Giving additional evidence for something. Okay, how about confounded? Does confounded mean to confirm something, to show that something's true, to surpass something? Natalie's saying no. Natalie, what does confounded mean? Yeah, it means to confuse something. Not exactly overlook, more about confusing something. But either way, we can eliminate that. All right, how about puzzled? What does puzzled mean? Yeah, really same as confounded or confused, right? Okay, so if we didn't like confounded, we didn't like puzzled. How about abrogated? What does abrogated mean? Yeah, abrogated, Jignassa's got a great definition. Abrogated means abolished, ended. It comes from the word abrogate, which means to end or annul. Yeah, and Muhammad, you're exactly right. Confounded and puzzled are very close to each other. And we'll come back and talk about that in a second. But abrogated does not mean surpass or confirm. Abrogated means to get rid of something, to abolish something. All right, does exceeded mean surpassed or confirmed? Okay, now we've got to pick two answers. What two answers are we going to pick given what our paper looks like right here? Yeah, we're going to end up choosing corroborated, I should say, and exceeded. Okay, what does augured mean in the end? Anybody know? Everybody know what augured means? So the word augur means to foreshadow or to predict something, right? So the environmentalists augured bad predictions, right? Yeah. So augured actually has to do with what the environmentalists said. It doesn't have anything to do with what the actual garbage patch did. No, augment means to make something better, to make something stronger. And so, Natalie, the AUG might actually be coming from the same root, although I don't actually know off the top of my head. I'd have to look that up. But augment means to make something stronger or more complete or better. And Muhammad's actually got a really good definition for augured, be a sign of, to be a sign of something that will come later. Okay, so here's the point I wanted to make that Muhammad noticed. Notice in these answers, out of 6 of them, we have 2 answers that are correct. They don't mean exactly the same thing. They're not true synonyms, but they sort of go together. We've got another pair of answers, right? We've got another pair of answers that are synonyms of each other. And then we've got a third pair of answers that are not similar to each other at all. Augured and abrogated are not similar at all. One of the things that we'll learn how to do in class 3 is use answer analysis instead of sentence analysis. Answer analysis tells me that augured and abrogated cannot be the correct answer because those 2 words don't have synonyms amongst the 6 answers. Almost every one of these problems you're ever going to see is going to be a pair of words that are synonyms and are correct. Another pair of words that are synonyms and are incorrect. And then another pair of words that aren't synonyms at all and must be incorrect. So one of the tricks that we'll learn in class 3 is how to recognize immediately that augured and abrogated have to be incorrect. And then we're just deciding, do we want something that means puzzled or does we want something that means confirmed? And we can work backwards into the sentence and use the answers to help us work back to the blank. And that's really, really useful when the sentence is very hard to understand, but the answers are easier to understand. On the other hand, when the sentence is easier to understand and the answers are hard, then we want to do it the way we just did it, where we work forwards from the sentence to the answers. So that's one of the things that we're going to learn about in a couple of weeks. That's something that's going to allow us to really increase our ability to work these problems. And it's a really cool feature of sentence equivalence. All right, the themes common to both types. Number 1, ignore the answer choices at first and come up with your own answer, right? Ignore the answers, come up with your own answers, and then compare the answer choices not to the original sentence, but compare the answer choices to what you wrote down, and then write your calls. Is it correct? Is it definitely incorrect? Is it something you might want to keep? Or is it something you don't know the meaning of? And remember, if you don't know the meaning of the word, that means it might be the right answer. You cannot eliminate a word if you don't know what it means. You got to keep it at least at first. And finally, I hope you guys have seen that even though the vocabulary isn't as bad as it was on the old GRE or as important, it's still pretty bad and it's still pretty important. So it's worth learning those words. Next week and in class 3, we will touch on some of the backup strategies in much greater detail. We'll learn how to deal with situations where we don't know all the words. We'll learn how to analyze these sentences better and really recognize the type of language that clues us in to the words in the blanks. We'll learn how to do answer analysis and sentence equivalence, and that's super powerful. Obviously, we don't have time to do it today because we also want to cover some math, but there's all sorts of other really cool stuff that we're going to learn with both text completion and sentence equivalence. And it's those backup strategies, those situations where you don't know how to do it in a straightforward way, and yet you still give yourself a really good chance to get the problem correct. That's what's going to make a huge difference for your score. All right, questions at all before we move on? All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Liz, and she's going to take you guys through some math. And so at this point, I think we're going to have probably around an hour left. And once again, sorry that we got started a little bit late today, but hopefully you guys can stick around. So here's Liz.
Great, thank you so much, Ian. Let's get going now on math. In a lot of ways, there's some similarities between verbal and math on the GRE, and one thing that we're going to start looking at right away is this whole thing of verbose and abstruse quant. A lot of times, the issue with the math on the GRE is not that it's actually that hard, but that it's hard to understand exactly what the question is asking. Yes, absolutely, Catherine, verbose means wordy, and abstruse is complex. Excellent, excellent. All right, good definitions. So it's really important that we have a good process for solving these problems. These do not look like questions from math class. Don't expect them to look like questions from math class. Your process is going to be a little bit different. The questions are testing logic and mental flexibility. In addition to math, the math is actually fairly basic and straightforward. It really doesn't go beyond algebra, all right? But the logic and the mental flexibility is where the huge challenge can lie. Students often think that they could do the math if they knew what the problem was asking. The solution to this, most people are rushing because the test is time pressured. But the real solution to this is to take the time up front to figure out what the question is asking. You can't solve anything that you don't understand. And the GRE often asks things in complicated ways. Okay? We call these complicated ways GRE code. You need to learn the code so that you understand what's being asked. All right, so here is a problem. And before getting too excited about it, I want to highlight some GRE code. All right, it says if A and B are less than 0 and B and C are greater than 0, which of the following must be true? And notice all of these have that less than 0. Okay, that should make you think of something. What is less than 0 code for? What kind of numbers are less than 0? Go ahead, type it in. Think about this. This is just code, negative. All right, so that tells you that this question is about the sign. All right, it's about signs. So if A times B is less than 0, what do I know about the signs of A and B? Okay, that's how I think to solve it. This question is about signs. Positive, negative. Yeah, Catherine, one of them is negative and one is positive. They have opposite signs. It could be plus, minus, or it could be minus plus. All right, and if B times C is greater than 0, what do I know about the signs of B and C? What do I know? Look at the second one. Well, they could both be negative. What's the other possibility? The issue is that there are two possibilities. All right, either plus plus or minus minus. And under time pressure, we'll often forget about the minus minus. This just means that the signs agree. Okay? All right, so the thing that these two have in common is B. B has to have the same sign in A times B as it has in B times C. So you can match this up and make a little table. Okay, I know that the B's, yeah. Okay, if B is negative, all right, if B is negative, then A has to be positive. Okay, and C has to be what? If B is negative, then C has to be negative. Okay, AC would be positive. Exactly, exactly. The key to this problem, this isn't a very hard problem. You might need to write out a little table with A, B, and C. What can I figure out? Okay, this is a really good way to do it. But the key to solving this problem is to first think about the problem. All right, so A, B could be positive, negative, then B, C, and C would have to be negative. All right, so you'd write your little table out like this. Okay, and then it's not so hard. All right, the whole key here is understanding. Good. All right, smile if you're pretty comfortable with this little bit of code. Positives and negatives. If you're not, I want you to message. Ian is here to answer questions in the chat window. Let's see if you guys can find the smiley. Smile if you're comfortable with this. I can't see faces. Okay, great. And if you're not comfortable, let me know either with a thumbs down or type a message to Ian. I'm going to move right along because we have a lot to cover. I want to show you some other code. This is quite intimidating, isn't it? It looks horrible. Many people start to hyperventilate when they see this. Okay, if S sub n equals S sub n minus 1 plus S sub n minus 2 minus 3, then what is S sub 6 when S sub 1 equals 5 and S sub 2 equals 0? The key to answering this question is not to start by hyperventilating. You need to look at this and say, what does it mean? Okay, when I have this little subscript notation, I'm talking about sequences of numbers. All right, and this is telling me, okay, so I have a sequence of numbers, S sub 1, S sub 2, S sub 3, S sub 4, just in order. I don't know what they are, okay, but I know that to calculate any number in the sequence, I look at the two numbers that came before it. Okay, so the value of any number in the sequence is the previous number plus the number before that minus 3. It's a formula for calculating a number if I know the two previous numbers in the sequence. Now, once I see that, guys, look at this. Why would they give me S sub 1, the value of S sub 1 and S sub 2? Okay, type it in. Why would they give me that? This is how your thought process should go. This is what they've told me. Okay, I understand it. Okay, yeah, Bharati has it. If I know S sub 1 and S sub 2, I can calculate S sub 3. Okay, because I just plug them in. To get S sub 3, I need the previous two numbers. That's S sub 2 and S sub 1. All right, and then I can go through. Once I know S sub 3, I can calculate S sub 4. Okay, and then S sub 5 and 6, just on in an iterative manner like that. All right, it looks very confusing, but it's actually pretty straightforward if you know what it means. All right, questions here. Smile if this one's comfortable. Okay, we're not even trying to solve the problems at this point. We're just trying to understand what does it say. Always the first step is what does it actually mean. Thumbs down if it doesn't make sense. You can make a little frowny face or ask a question. Okay, people are kind of quiet, and this is really important. This is the key to unpacking these GRE problems. All right. I don't see any thumbs down, so I'm going to continue on and show you another slide. What is the greatest integer value of n such that 2 to the n is a factor of 200 to the 6th? Oh my goodness, how could I even calculate 200 to the 6th on my calculator? What does this mean, is a factor of? How do I translate this and figure out what it's saying? What does it mean? Anybody remember? What does it mean to be a factor of? Could somebody express that in simple language? If 2 to the n is a factor of 200 to the 6th, never mind solving it, just what does it mean? All right. To be a multiple of, close. A factor is the reverse of a multiple, right? All right. Is one of the lowest prime number that makes up the bigger number. Okay. So Catherine, you're saying you're close. Again, I think you have it. A factor of a number just means that I can divide evenly. All that means is that 200 to the 6th divided by 2 to the n is an integer if it's a factor. That just means I can multiply 2 to the n by something. Okay, equals an integer. All right, I can multiply 2 to the n. Before we solve, Muhammad, let's just look at the problem. This just means I can multiply 2 to the n by something to get 200 to the 6th. All right, and Catherine was on the right track for solving. Okay, how do I figure out how many times 2 to the n divides 200 to the 6th? I have to think about prime numbers and prime factors. Anybody know? What do I do to figure this out? Anybody have an idea of where to start? Reduce 200. Excellent. I think Catherine knows how. Yeah, I would reduce 200 to see how many times just plain old straight 2 divides it. And then I would worry about the exponents later. Okay? So that would be a great approach. All right? And Muhammad is calculating for us. All right? Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay? And what I would say is if you don't follow that, what you need to know right now is, okay, I've got to figure out how many 2's are in 200. Anybody remember these factor trees from grade school? Smile at me if you remember doing these factor trees, like what I'm doing right now. Okay. A number of you remember them. Excellent. All right, so this is super useful on the GRE. This is, for this problem, a calculator will get you into serious trouble. Can spend a lot of time with it. It's actually faster to figure this out this way, all right? From this, we know that 2 goes into 203 times. Okay, we don't have to break down the 25 because that's only divisible by 5, not by 2. All right, so when I think about this, I've got 6 200s here, and each one contains 3 2's, and so that's how Muhammad figured out, oh, 2, there are 18 2's. If I were to factor this gigundo number, 200 to the 6th, I get 18 2's. So that 2 to the n, the biggest power of 2 that divides this, is 2 to the 18th. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Okay, but the key is this language. It's very easy to confuse factor and multiple. Fewer factors, more multiples is the way to remember it. Or you can think, oh, the factor divides the number, right? Or I multiply something by the factor to get the number. Smile at me if this language is comfortable. If this language is completely foreign, I'm going to recommend that you watch Foundations of Math tapes because you've got to know this language of math, all right? If it's uncomfortable, I want you to message me or message Ian, and I'm going to recommend that you watch the tapes to learn the language. And you may have to put some of the math language on flashcards as well. Again, the key is to understand these problems, what they are asking before you try and solve. That's the key to a really high quant score. What is it saying? All right. Now, here's another type of problem. Ian talked about these quantitative comparisons. I think these problems are a ton of fun because they can be really fast. But some of them are super confusing. All right. Let me just quickly explain how to answer here. You would pick A. Here's the answer rubric on the bottom if the quantity in A is greater. B if B is greater. C if they're equal. And D if you can't tell. At first, this looks super intimidating. The greatest integer less than 70 that has only one factor m such that 1 is less than m is less than 70. But what we have to do is break it down. Notice the greatest integer less than n. The least integer greater than 65. Okay, so what numbers are they talking about? What should I do? If I'm looking for a greatest integer less than 70, yeah, I start off with 69. Okay, so I keep counting down 69, 68, 67, 66, 65, etc. until I find one that fits this description. Okay, same thing here. What is the least integer greater than 65? I love the language. It's so funky. The least integer greater than 65. What's this part? The least integer, now this is where it's tricky, Catherine. It's not the integer less than 65, the least integer greater than 65. Yeah, it's tricky. It's super tricky. It starts with 66. Okay, counting up. All right. Now, several of you have already recognized the second part of it. Again, it's code. What is a number that has only one factor m? Such that m is greater than 1, okay, and less than that number. This is a specific type of number. This is a definition of a certain type of number. What numbers have only two factors, one in themselves? Primes, exactly. So this question is about a prime. In this also, it's asking about a prime. And here we want to count down to find the first prime that's 69 or less, and here we want to count up, okay? And it turns out that the first prime here is 67, all right? And we can figure that out pretty easily. 69 is divisible by 3. Anybody know the rule for divisibility by 3? I promise the math is the easy part. It really is. The logic is the hard part. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Add the digits up and you should get a number that's a multiple of 3. That's how you test for divisibility by 3. It's a good test to know. And then any even number greater than 2 is, of course, divisible by 2 and not a prime number. All right. Good. Okay, so I had a question about m's. The m is not necessarily the same, okay, in the two statements. This is a funky part of the mathematical language. If m is used in one statement, it's the same m all the way through. If m is used on the top up here, if they were to give you some information, say m is between 68 and 66, it would be the same m. But here, when we're using m, we're just saying, I'm thinking of, a number, there's one factor, call it whatever you want to call it because you need something to denote it, and I'm not going to use a number, I'll just use a variable. I could call it x or y, and I could have used m here and n here. Okay, but sometimes they're just confusing, and they use the same variable in two different sections. But that doesn't mean that it's the same unless there's something unifying them. All right? So it's like a very tricky math class. These are conventions that you learned in math class, but generally math teachers try to be a little more straightforward and a little more clear about what they want. The GRE tries to be tricky. It's deliberately tricky because it is forced to use only relatively straightforward math. The math is straightforward, the logic is not. Okay, does that make sense that the m's are not the same? Okay, everybody understand what this was asking? The answer is C, by the way. Smile if you understand. thumbs down or ask a question if you're confused. These are tough problems, by the way, the problems that we've been looking at for code, and they're tough because of the cracking of the problem, the understanding what it says. If you can change your process so that you do these math problems by first figuring out what they mean, I always say you understand, then you plan, then you solve. And if you can do that rather than trying to solve right at once, you'll find that you get a much higher GRE math score. You make far fewer silly errors. All right, so just a quick recap of the code. And this should be in your handout packet. Okay, just so you can see handouts, just so you can see what it means. How would you decode something? And there are additional things in here. Okay. All right. Just so you can remember that you need to be able to decode. Of these, I would say that this one with positive and negative is very, very common. This is also common if you're doing well. You'll get the sequence notation. And you'll also see this notation with factor if you're doing even moderately well, you will see this. All right, so if you get the hard or the medium section second, you'll see this, and you'll see it in your initial math section as well. All right, so what you want to do, you're going to go through your code handout, and whenever you review a test, which is something we'll talk about later, or review problems that you did, you're going to add any new code, anything that you should have been able to recognize and break down more quickly, because that is the key to speed, to know that you're looking at code. They use the same things over and over again. They're just not that many tricks that they can use. And that's why we can create a code sheet. Okay, so this is just a beginning taste of it. When you find code, you have to write it down. This is one of many reasons why it's so important to review the problems that you do. We don't care so much about right and wrong. We care about why. We have to be extremely analytical to move our score forward. Okay. This is the code handout that I talked about. All right. And many of you will want to make code flashcards. Again, this will depend on your math background. I think someone was going on for a PhD in engineering. If you've taken a ton of math, you probably do know a lot of the code by now. You'll need fewer flashcards. If math is kind of rusty, if it's been since high school, then you're going to need more flashcards just because you will have forgotten a lot of the terms. All right? Okay. Everything, all code is learnable. Everything here is learnable. All right, now I'd like to move us on to look at quantitative comparison problems. Okay, so we did see one of these. Let's take a look again in detail, and there are 4 parts to the problem. This information up here, this is given information, all right, and let me label it. This is the given information. And important things about the given information, the x here, this is where the x here is definitely the same as this x here, and the y here is the same as this y here. Any x or y used for either quantity, quantity A or quantity B, will be the same as what was used up here. Okay? Okay, now Mohammed, slow down. I have a question to ask you looking at this. All right, it's really tempting. Okay, Sadaf has a D up. I'm going to ask you guys, do you see the letters? If you want to answer, why don't you put in the letters? All right, why don't you guys put in the letters? You can use the polling letters. All right, and then you can tell me without spoiling it for other people who are figuring it out. Okay. All right, good. So you guys understand what it means. A lot of people are good at math. Fantastic. When I think about this problem, though, I want you to first just look, and you're right, D is the correct answer. We're going to come back. Okay. Given information, quantity A, quantity B, and then our answer choices. All right. This is what you're going to see on the test screen. In class, today, I'm going to give you a little reminder as you do problems. Okay. But as we go forward, you won't see the reminder, you won't see this little rubric here, because I don't want you to look at it. I don't want you to read it. I don't want you to fall back on it as a crutch that just wastes your time. I want you to memorize it. Okay, and it's not very difficult. A, B, that's obvious. C, they're the same, and D, I can't tell. All right? Now, a couple things to point out for those of you who are finding this a little bit confusing. If it says, if I pick A is greater, that means it's always greater. There are no numbers that I could pick that would make it not be greater. Okay? Same with picking B is greater, and same with picking equal. Now, there is something really interesting that applies to this last problem. If the quantities in A and B have more than one possible value, your strategy is to actively try to prove D. That's the best strategy, all right, if they have more than one possible value. Okay, so that's a question that you want to ask yourself as you look at a problem. Do the variables have more than one possible value? All right, so let's just take a look. I'm going to put that last one in slow motion. Okay. All right. So you might have tested. How many of you tested? Smile at me if you tested with this problem. Smile at me if you tested numbers. Okay, good. If you tested numbers, maybe you just, you picked 4 for X. All right. You picked 2 for Y. What I want you to think about then is what possible answer choices does that leave me with? A and D. Note that it can't be B and it can't be C, okay, because the one in quantity A is greater. But what other types of numbers should I think about? Type it in. Is the world only positive numbers? What else should I think about? Yeah, negatives. Exactly, negatives, because when we go to negative, if we just try -4 and -2, oh, well, let's think, Catherine. Okay, the operation going on here, Catherine's question is excellent. Fractions are also special numbers, but here we don't really have to worry about fractions. Why is that? Look at the given information. Why don't we have to worry so much about fractions here? Okay, the answer is D, but why? The mathematical operations used in the given information will help you to figure out what to worry about. This is just plain old multiplication. 2 times y, so a constant times the number. All right? It's linear. Nothing goes crazy with fractions. Catherine, for what numbers? Fractions are very interesting for certain types of numbers. For what value ranges are fractions really interesting? Think about it. All right? You might remember graphing linear equations, and then there's another kind of equation that everybody graphed in algebra, where fractions make the curve look weird. Anybody remember? Think about where fractions are weird. What's funky about fractions? mx plus b, that's linear. Okay, but there's another kind of equation, and mx plus b, a hyperbola. Exactly. If I've got a linear equation, it's flat. The only real change might be going from positive to negative at some value. Okay, but other types of equations, I'm thinking about a parabola, fractions are really weird, okay? Fractions are really weird here. What happens to a fraction? What's an operation where fractions are really weird? You might remember the formula for this. What could you do? I can show you a problem if nobody can think about it. All right? Natalie, you're onto it. Think for a moment. How are fractions weird? What do they do that's weird? There's a mathematical operation that's very weird with fractions. Here, just multiplying by a constant is fine. All right. I see a couple people typing. Good. All right. Think about it. Does it have to do with symmetry? Close, but not quite. Let me show you. All right. Let's look at another problem. Okay. So with this one, we know to think about positives, right? That's easy. Okay, and that means the answer is going to be B or D. We've already thought, yeah, I should think about negatives as well. Okay, thinking about x and x squared. All right, and here they are the same number. Okay. Still looks like D. 0. Yeah. 0 would be very interesting here. 0. Okay. What else? Not whole numbers. Catherine, what would happen if I squared a fraction? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. If I square a fraction, now if I use 0, and 0 is a really good number to test, if I square a fraction, it gets smaller. That is what's really weird. Okay, and if you look at that shape, this is the graph of y equals x squared, not drawn very well. It's weird in the range from 0 to 1. It doesn't increase very quickly. It increases really quickly when you're above 1. Okay, it's weird. It's weird also for 0 and for 1, which would be other good numbers to try. These two would make you think C. All right, but if you'd already done this stuff, you would have gotten to D. Okay, so when you're testing numbers, I always like to think, well, what is weird here? What numbers would give me something weird? Okay, and that's how I test. Now I want to show you something else, just to show you something else to keep in mind when you're testing. All right, what about if you're testing something like this? Not so nice anymore, right? Not like x and x squared. You got x squared plus 4x plus 3, x squared minus 6x plus 9, bluck. All right, that's a technical term, bluck. Okay, this would be super slow. What should I test instead? Guys, what should I test instead? What would be easy to test and informative? Anybody? What would be helpful? Yeah, testing 0 could be great. All right, I'll test 0. Okay, and then quantity B is greater. Okay, what else should I test? Subtract the 2. Okay, Sarah, I could subtract, if I subtracted the 2, I could subtract 1 from the other, but I have to be a little careful with that before I do that. I think I'd be happier testing numbers first, and I'll explain when you might want to subtract something from both sides. I mean, I could realize that both sides have an x squared, and that's going to be the same, and I could subtract that off. All right. Yeah, 1. Always try the simplest things you could try first. Okay. This would be a lot faster to test 0 and 1 than it would be to test 2. So you need to be strategic in terms of what you test. All right. Is there any way these two could be equal, guys? Now, Sarah, here comes in here's where you might do some subtraction. Is there any way these could be equal? All right. Is there any way these could be equal? Okay, think about it. Even just a yes or a no. All right, and there's an algebraic way to go about it if you think that maybe they could be equal. Okay. Yeah, what you would do is you would set them equal to each other and solve for x, and then you could subtract the x squared from both sides. Okay, and if you can prove that sometimes they're equal, all right, that also, you know, an equal in something else, then you would get D. But here, this is enough. If sometimes one is greater and sometimes the other is greater, the answer has to be D. Okay? The answer has to be D. So there is more than one way to pull these problems apart, but we're always trying to go for a fast way and an easy way. And testing 0 and 1 tends to be a very fast way and a very easy way. All right? Yeah, you could definitely, okay, so I think what you're doing, Muhammad, is you're trying to factor these, but you don't know that these are equal to 0. Okay, the algebra is very confusing, and you're only supposed to be factoring if this is set equal to 0, right? Because then you would be solving for solutions. Right now, this is just an expression. It's not an equation. Okay, it's just an expression. So you're better off with an expression just plugging in numbers. All right. Now let's look at another one. Okay. Actually, first, let me point out the important value ranges. And these are important value ranges because numbers tend to behave differently. You see weird things. Fractions are weird. What's weird with fractions? Squaring them. Okay. Negative numbers are also weird. Negative numbers are weird because if you raise them to even powers, you get even numbers. Whereas if you raise them to odd powers, raising to powers often makes numbers behave strangely, you get negative numbers. Okay, so it's very helpful to think about the boundary numbers, -1, 0, and 1, and then maybe some extreme values, a very large number, a very small number, and maybe a fraction. You won't need all of these numbers for every problem. You shouldn't do this like a machine. Okay, you need to be intuitive. You need to say, what's this problem about, and let that guide you. What numbers would make it behave strangely, and what would be easy to test, starting with easy to test and what might cause something strange. Okay, and these three numbers, -1, 0, and 1, are always good to think about. Would these numbers cause something strange? All right? Okay. And some numbers, absolutely, Ian is telling me, is reminding me, some numbers will rule a range out. Some will say that x is greater than 0 or x is less than 1 or something like that. Okay? So you always want to do that thinking up front. What could make this expression behave strangely? What could I test here? What would make sense? All right. Now, there's another situation where you have variables. Okay. But why is this different? Why can't I just test numbers for x and y? Anybody see it? This is a very different situation. All right. I'm given these. Okay. And I can't test. Anybody know why I can't test values? Anybody recognize this problem? What does y have to be equal to? Anybody know? What is y? Yeah, we know what y is. Exactly, Jane. We can solve for it. All right? We can solve for it. We know that the sum of y and 60 has to be 180. All right? And they're going to assume that you know things like that, that you know that, say, the sum of the angles in a triangle is 180, and the sum of the angles that make up a line is also 180. And they're going to test you on this. So you're going to have to remember your elementary geometry. Don't worry, it doesn't get too hard. A lot of the geometry is very intuitive. They don't use anything like trigonometry, no sine and no cosine, but you do have to remember the stuff that you learned in your first geometry class and review it. All right? So here we're not dealing with variables that have multiple values where I would plug in. Here I'm dealing with an unknown that I solve for. All right, or rather two unknowns. Okay, exactly, Muhammad. And it's important to figure out the difference. Am I looking at a problem where there's an unknown that I have to solve for, or am I looking at some kind of relationship where I have to plug in variables where there are different potential values? All right, two critical types of problem to look at. Now, when I have a problem like this, if I realize I need to solve for a value, think strategically. One answer choice can never be correct. Which answer choice can never be correct? Just logically. If I can solve for a value, what can never be correct? Type it in. Very good. Catherine, Jane, and Emma, absolutely. And Debbie, it can't be D. And Sarah, you have to be logical. When you see one of these, even if you can't solve, if you know it's possible to solve, and you guess, don't guess D. All right. Now, let's look at something else. This is absolutely written to intimidate. This problem is supposed to scare you because your calculator, the calculator that they give you, probably won't even calculate 8,000 to the 15th. It'll give it to you in scientific notation at the best. All right. But what do you see? What do you see here that's interesting? Okay. When you have a problem where the computation would be horrendous, factors, okay, excellent. Catherine sees factors, absolutely. What else do you see? Before you guess, common factors. Right, Debbie. Okay, I also see, look at this, and this is an even easier way to do it. the exponents 5 and 10. Here the exponent's 15, so I could rewrite this as 8,000 to the 5th times 8,000 to the 10th. Okay, now if I'm comparing these sides, what do you guys think? Now think about it. Should be a lot easier to see. Come up with an answer. All right, just post your answer. Okay, now that we've rewritten it. Yeah, it becomes pretty obvious, right, that it's B. Okay, because we're multiplying the bigger number times the bigger number, 8,000 to the 5th, 8,000 to the 10th, whereas this was only 200 to the 5th times 40 to the 10th. Okay, so it has to be that B is bigger, all right? And a lot of these problems where it looks like there's horrendous math to do are easily solved if you find common ground. If you see, oh, they've got that 15 in common, and then you look at how can I rewrite, you think, how can I rewrite, rather than trying to calculate on the calculator. Okay, so another critical technique. All right, now strategic integer testing. Oh, I'm sorry, Muhammad. Okay, is it 200 to the 15th times, okay, 40 to the 15th? Yeah. Yeah, you could have broken that one up, this one up this way, absolutely. All right, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely, good point. Good point. There are often multiple ways to rewrite. Okay, and that's something to keep in mind. People ask me, is there a best way? And I have to tell you that no. What you need to do, you need to sort of use that intuitive sort of thinking style where you look at something and you say, okay, if it's too hard to do as a straight out computation, so what do I see? Okay, so Muhammad saw the 200 and the 40, 200 times 40 would make 8,000. Oh, so this is 200 to the 15th times 40 to the 15th. Okay, that's obviously greater than 200 to the 5th times 40 to the 5th. All right, and I perhaps saw it a little differently. I saw the 5 and the 10, and so I broke it up this way, but either would work. Okay, so creative problem-solving skills. If the problem is super hard, looking, if there's a computation like this, that means you need to be creative. And I always say, well, what do I see? What's going on here? What do I see that's interesting? Okay, and Ian is talking about simple, elegant solutions and sounding very much like a mathematician. All right, and it's actually true. Okay, okay. The solutions are often simple and elegant. You do need to be able to crunch. You do need to know your rules of exponents. But if you are solving a problem correctly, you'll be able to solve these actually in under a minute and 15 seconds. All right, so that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so let's look at this next problem. Let's talk about strategic testing. Okay, if I'm told that n is an integer, and I'm asked, on one side, I've got something really messy, right? The largest value of n for which 2 to the n is greater than 5 to the n minus 3. Okay, and I've got 6. Okay, what should I do? What should I do? I mean, 6 is obviously 6. How do I deal with this? The largest value of n for which 2 to the n is greater than 5 to the n minus 3. My goodness, what should I do? All right, anybody have any thoughts? What could I do here? Like, how am I supposed to solve that? How am I supposed to figure it out? All right, all of you, think with me. Well, do I have a common exponent? I've got the largest n for which 2 to the n is greater than 5 to the n minus 3. Sarah has it. Plug in 6. All right, I don't care what n is. All I have to do is plug in 6. Okay, I use the common value in B. It's like cheating off of the easy column. Okay, so then I just have to calculate. Okay, so 2 to the 6, that's 64. 5 to the 6 minus 3, that's 5 to the 3rd, that's 125. All right, and I am going to tell you that you need to know, here is some base content. You need to know your powers of 2, and you also need to know your perfect squares, all right, and perfect cubes. Okay, and just like you need to know your times tables. You can use the calculator, but you will be faster if you just have some of these things memorized. All right, but you could use a calculator for this one. You could certainly calculate 2 to the 6th, and you could calculate 5 to the 3rd. Okay, it's just helpful if you have them memorized, especially if you don't always type correctly on calculators. All right, questions or comments on this one? Questions or comments? Okay, smile if so far you're comfortable. These are my big techniques for how to handle these quantitative comparisons. Catherine, I would say no up to about 10 cubed. If you recognize those numbers, they'll often come up in problems. You don't have to go super high with the squares either. You know, if you know up to about 15 squared, that's plenty. You can, of course, calculate it on the calculator, but the more powerful thing is sometimes on the problems, you'll recognize a number and say, hey, 125 is special. Oh, that's 5 cubed. Okay, and that's where it's even more useful than here, because here you really could use the calculator. All right? Okay, you're welcome. All right, so now that we've thought about it, let's think again about that whole thing with the calculator. Look at this problem, all right? And think about this. The school has 120 juniors, all right, with an average final exam score of 90, and 100 seniors with an average final exam score of 94, okay? And I need to decide whether 92 is greater or whether the average of the juniors and the seniors' final exam scores is combined. All right, now how many of you know how to calculate this on a calculator? Smile at me if you know how to calculate it. All right, yeah, and Mohammed's written it out for anyone who doesn't know how to calculate it. All right, this is how to calculate it. You would multiply that 120 times 90, okay, and then you would add to that 100 times 94, and then you would have to divide it by 220, okay, which would be 120 plus 100 to get the average. But that's pretty slow. I can just look at this and say, well, wait a second. If there were equal numbers of juniors and seniors, what would the average have to be? What would the average have to be if there were equal numbers of juniors and seniors? It would be 92, but there are more juniors. So what does the average have to be close to? It has to be closer to the junior average than to the senior average, because there are more juniors than seniors. It's as if you have a seesaw, right? It's going to be weighted. There are more juniors than seniors. All right, so the balance is going to be closer to the juniors than to the seniors. There are lots of them and fewer seniors. So this number has got to be less than 92. I don't need to calculate it to know that. Exactly, Sadaf and Catherine. It's got to be less. All right. So without bothering to plug in and waste the time here, I would know, oh, B is greater. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, without doing any work at all. Oh, well, this is a weighted average. And you know with a weighted average that the average is going to be closer to the average for the group that has more people. Okay? Common sense is extremely helpful. You want to avoid calculations when you can. I almost think the calculator is sort of a temptation to waste a lot of time. I haven't had any problem with the GRE doing the problems without a calculator. And even if you used it for a few of them, say calculating an exponent like 5 to the 3rd or 2 to the 6th, it shouldn't take you a lot of time. But if you use the calculator on every problem, you will run out of time. Absolutely. Okay. Some of this kind of stuff is just so much faster if you just think about it with common sense. All right. Now, I have some problems to do. We're already over time. So what I'm going to do is just put up a set of problems just so you can see them and just try them. And we'll be done. We're just going to do one set just so you can see what they're like. I'm going to put up my timer. And when you're done with all 3 problems, just post the answer, use the polling buttons to the first one. And this is going to be our first posting of answers, our first polling in. So here you go. Each one should take about 1 minute and 15 seconds. It shouldn't take long. You should be able to use one of the strategies we discussed on each problem. Right, let's see. Now, I'm going to ask everyone to poll in the answer, and we're going to do this as a regular habit. You should see A, B, C, D, and E as Ian is typing below the names. You want to poll in your answer to the first question. Okay, just poll it in. And if you don't know, guess. You're going to have to guess sometimes on the GRE. Okay, and let me just show you, all right? So a couple people haven't answered, but what I can do if you poll in is I can do this. I can show you the distribution of the class's answers. Always a couple people won't answer. Ian and I won't answer, but everyone else will, all right? Now, normally I'd put students on the mic to go through the explanations, but because we're so crunched for time, I'm just going to give away the keys, okay? Just going to tell you. X is negative. All right, what numbers should we test? What numbers should we test? Type it in. Type it in. Definitely we test, okay, we don't want to test any positive numbers because it tells us X is negative. But I see -1 and -2. Now, the thing is, if you test -1, all right, and here I'll just put the numbers to test up here, you realize that -1 to the third is the same as -1 to the fifth, okay? Both produce -1, all right? But with -2, A would be greater. So with -1, if X is -1, the answer would be C. However, with -2, so the answer has to be D, all right? You don't even need to test a fraction, okay? It might be tempting to test a fraction, but I think there's something here. They're telling you X is negative, all right? Okay, if you tested a fraction, it would go the other way. Testing a fraction would work. Actually, I'm going to put that up here, okay, as well, because in that case it would be B. All right, good job. Questions? Questions? Questions or comments? All right, smile if that one made sense. Otherwise, ask a question, make a comment. All right. Okay, awesome. Let's continue on then. What about the next one? What technique should we use here? What technique should we use here? Okay. All right. All right. Okay, 0, 1, -1. Okay, and I always say start with the easiest. All right, let me just put up the answers. Everybody poll in. What's your answer so I can show you guys the distribution. Think about what we're testing. I've been told 0, 1, -1. Okay. Sarah, no, it doesn't. Okay, this is only specifically to this problem. All right. These are 3 different questions. Okay. So if you need to change your answer, that's fine. All right. Yeah, if they give you given information, it only applies to one problem. Each problem is self-contained. On the test, you would only see one problem at a time. Okay. So if you tested 0, they would both end up, what would you end up with? If I tested 0 here, I'd get -2, right? And then I'd get -3. That would be with x equal to 0. Okay, so then I would think the answer was A. Or it could be D. I don't know yet. Here, I'll put them as D as a possibility. Okay. But if I tested 1, what would I get, guys? What if you plugged in 1 for x? What are you going to get? If I plug in 1, I don't really quite have space for it. But if I plug in 1, yeah, I'm going to get 0. So what does the answer have to be? Okay, but overall, C or D. So what does the answer have to be? Our final answer has to be D. Good. And everybody's showing me a D. So I take it that that means that everybody got it, which is awesome. All right. Now, this problem is a little different. What is funky about this problem? Can I plug in numbers for n? Can I plug in numbers? I can solve for n. Exactly. Exactly. I can solve for n. Okay. C means same in all cases. Thank you, Ian. All right, does n have to be negative? Let's think about it. Okay, yeah, because the absolute value of -7 here, that's what these bars mean. Everybody recognize these absolute value bars? This is something going back to grade school. Smile if you know this symbol. Smile if you recognize those symbols. Okay, thumbs down if you don't. Here they are absolute values, absolute value bars. So this is saying that 7 equals -n, all right? And so then you know that -7 has to equal n, okay? So let's see. But if I look at answers, only a few of you have answered. Oh, no. All right. All right. Oops, now I see more people answering. Okay. So we got it. This is just a question of knowing what they're asking and being able to decode it. And sometimes you do have to decode given information. All right, fantastic. Fantastic. The poll now is showing everyone pretty much sitting on B. Okay, any questions? This was a solve. Solve for n. Any questions so far? I know these problems were not terribly difficult. You'll find that's true of a lot of problems. If you take the time with QC to think, what does it mean? What are they asking? What's a good approach? You'll find that this is not terribly difficult. This becomes kind of fun, and this is a place where you can make up time on the quant section. You can go quite a bit faster on these problems than on some of the other problems where you have to do more math and more thinking. Okay, with that, thank you so much for staying late. I'm going to declare us done with math, hop off the mic and hand it over to Ian in case he has any final words. I'm going to encourage you to do math problems. There are plenty of them in the homework. And to try these techniques with QC to see how straightforward these techniques can make QC, because we'll be doing plenty more QC problems as the class goes forward. Off with the mic. Here you go, Ian.
Thank you guys for sticking around a little bit late. Once again, apologies that we got started a bit late today. That will not happen in the future. For everybody that's signed up for the class, we will see you in 165 or so hours. For everybody that's a trial student, I want to thank you guys for coming out and joining us today. We would love to see you in class if you decide to join us. Taylor is here to talk with you about doing that. If you decide not to join us, then we wish you the best of luck as you prepare for the GRE, and let us know if there's anything else we can help you with. In terms of homework, there's really three things, and I didn't finish writing them all yet, but I'll finish writing them now. There's really three things I want to make sure that everybody has done by the start of next week. So number one would be to take the first practice test if you haven't already, and you can do that from our website. And by the way, trial students, you have access to the first test for free. Even before you sign up for a course, you can take our first practice test for free, and I'd highly recommend doing that to see where you're starting out. Number two is learn the first vocab list, and that'll get emailed to you guys if it hasn't been already. And then the other thing to do is the basic math review, which is in your OG book, and highly recommend that you guys take the time to go through that. And that's really going to get us prepared for what we're going to do in class next week. So those are the main three things. There's about 8 other things listed in the syllabus, but those are the main three things that I really, really want you guys to focus on. And the first one is by far the most important one. The first one is by far the most important one. Do that one, if nothing else. All right, we're going to end it here. I'm going to turn off the recording now. Liz